Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of the Roald Dahl Retrospective, where we take a look at adaptations on Roald Dahl shorts and books. I am Patricia.
And my name is Arun.
So last time we discussed about the Disney stop-motion animated film, James and the Giant Peach. And today we're going to be discussing about another Roald Dahl adaptation that literally came out about a few months later on July of 1996. We're going to be talking about Matilda, which was based off of the 1988 novel of the same name.
And this movie that we're going to talk about, I have to say, it takes a lot of inspiration from various sources, and also it is Danny DeVito also directs, narrates, and even stars as one of the antagonists in this movie. So he's got plenty of involvement in this project. So.
Yeah. And even though that he has directed a lot of movies before and after Matilda, this is currently the only one he's directed that is a children's movie. He's mostly stuck to adult movies, either from PG-13 all the way to rated R. So this is something completely new to him. And from what I've seen, he did a really good job at it.
Yeah, but in a way, it kind of shows as well, because if you notice, there's a lot of dark elements in this. And also there's a lot of quite sad moments as well. And I mean, you can get a bit grim in some places in a way. But then also on top of that as well, it makes up for it doesn't lose its sense of fun in that as well. And so there's a lot to discuss.
Absolutely.
In this.
Yeah, so with that out of the way, let's get started. Here we go. So yeah, there's an interesting history behind Matilda. So very similar to other adaptations of Roald Dahl after his death, Lissy Dahl was involved in the movie, handpicking various people to write and produce the movie. So the screenwriters for the movie were Nicholas Kazan and Robin Sweecord, the latter of which actually wrote various screenplays for movies such as The Curious Case of Benjamin Button and Memoirs of a Geisha. So they worked together on writing a script that Lissy Dahl and the Dahl family would be really satisfied with, and any changes had to be going directly towards the family. And so after they were done writing the script, there was a huge auction that was going on who was going to be the one to produce the movie, and everybody wanted to get a piece of it. And eventually TriStar won by auctioning it for $4 million. And so when the movie came out in 1996, very similar to James and the Giant Peach, it was a financial failure. It only made $33 million out of a $36 million budget. However, unlike James and the Giant Peach, Matilda actually doubled its budget when it was released overseas, and with multiple TV and DVD releases and VHS releases, a lot more people started to see Matilda. And even still to this day, next to Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda is what many people consider to be the best Roald Dahl adaptation.
I think that's one of the great things about children's movies, is that I think it has a lot of replayability, I think, after its initial launch. So, I mean, how many times have we actually been through Disney movies where, obviously kids have thoroughly enjoyed them, and then after that they go on VHS or go on DVD, and all of a sudden they just become, classics on the shelves, pretty much, where basically they will get pulled off time and time and time again and just keep getting replayed. And I guess that's one of the benefits I think Matilda has, one of the advantages it has being advertised as, a family-friendly movie. And so it will obviously be there for when the kids are bored, or even then after the kids have their own kids, obviously that'll be there too. So it's something that's going to be around with us for a very long time, I think, Matilda. So.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I actually released a poll before we started doing James and the Giant Peach, because the four big movies that were going to be coming out were James and the Giant Peach, Matilda, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and Fantastic Mr. Fox. So according to the polls, out of the four movies, Matilda won by a landslide. Fantastic Mr. Fox came slightly close, but James and the Giant Peach was demolished, and so was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Everybody was looking forward to us talking about Matilda.
Maybe it was in hopes that maybe Mara Wilson might turn up, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's going into a bit of traffic, so she couldn't be with us today. So.
Right. Anyway, so very similar to what you did, Aaron, in which you were looking up like, oh man, you're like Matilda didn't do very well in the theaters. Like for some people, they're like, but Matilda's a classic. Why is that? Well, I decided to look up some movies that came out in August of 1996. I said July, I meant August, sorry. But yeah, these are the movies that came out in 1996. It came out on the 2nd of August. So it came out around the same month as Emma, Chain Reaction, Basquiat, Jack, John Carpenter's Escape from LA, House Arrest, Alaska, The Fan, Shine, Tin Cup, Bordello of Blood, Waiting for Guffman, Freeway, The Island of Dr. Moreau, She's the One, The Crow, City of Angels, Pusher, First Kid, and Sling Blade. So, yeah, I mean...
So basically, it was the victim of a saturated market of other movies that were also out there, which also had recognizable people in it, and obviously were baying for people's eyeballs. So,
yeah, pretty much. So, I mean, we have Jack, which was starring Robin Williams, where he plays as a 10-year-old in a 40-year-old man's body. We have the sequel to Escape from New York with Escape from LA. And let's see, I guess, and, insequential, and also various other movies. So, yeah, I mean, Matilda just so happened to be like sandwiched in, between movies that a lot of people were looking forward to watching. And, very similar to James and the Giant Peach, I guess Matilda wasn't like, really well known in like various libraries and books, because I knew people who saw the movie before they read the book.
Well, at least it wasn't banned like James with the Giant Peach was. So,
that's true. Yeah, it wasn't banned because it's nowhere near as like gruesome or have any whiskey references or swearing or anything like that. So yeah.
Yeah, anyway. It just has Mara Wilson doing witchcraft.
There you go. Sure. Anyway. Anyway, so yeah, so let's get things started. So I am actually curious about what your personal thoughts are of Danny DeVito being our narrator as well as being Mr. Wormwood.
Well, obviously he's multi-talented, so we can obviously give him that. So, I mean, like, my first, last time I remember Danny DeVito, I think at that time, was probably Mars Attacks. I think probably. And so, I mean, obviously I saw that movie and I thought, oh, he's just kind of like that one-dimensional kind of swami kind of guy. I thought like, it's, I didn't think Danny DeVito could kind of like emote any more than that. But no, he can really get us drawn in with his direction and his narration and also him being on the screen too. So this is one thing, I guess, maybe out of all the stuff that Danny DeVito has done over the years, maybe Matilda is probably his best, maybe one of his best works, because he's obviously so he can demonstrate how talented he can be. It's kind of like how Tommy Wiseau wanted to kind of like demonstrate how he could direct, how he could act, and how he could obviously do all the story elements of that. And obviously we know what happened with The Room when that happened. But Danny DeVito can show that he can do all these elements right, and he can obviously please all the people doing it. And
absolutely. In fact, if you remember a few months ago where he was interviewed by GQ, and he was talking about like, his all-time most well-known roles, like varying from Taxi to It's Sunny in Philadelphia, and a whole bunch of other movies. Matilda was one that he was personally proud of. First of all, he read the book to his kids when they were young, and also, he wanted to, include his wife into the movie at the time, Rhea Perlman, who also plays as Mrs. Wormwood. And he brought in a lot of people that he knew personally from previous movies into Matilda, who we'll talk about a little later on. And also, he he wanted to have fun with it. And you can definitely tell that he had a blast with, doing Matilda, whether it be directing or whether it be acting as Mr. Wormwood, where he's so mean and over the top, and, his narration. Although personally for me, I'm not too keen on the narration because it's like he plays such a major role in the movie that, you have him being angry and mean to juxtapose between him being like very sympathetic to Matilda. I mean, I can understand for Pete Postlethwaite from James and the Giant Peach, in which he was barely in the movie and he served as a narrator for like little bits at a time. And even with Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which we'll talk about next month, where, we had one of the Oompa Loompas being the narrator and, basically talking about what happened to Charlie and how he eventually, took over the chocolate factory. So those parts made sense. And as mentioned,
Doompa dippity doo, let me tell a story for you.
wrong movie. It's more like
I know.
but yes, but yeah, excuse me. But as for, Danny DeVito with his directing and his acting, I mean, he does a pretty good job. I mean, we were talking when we were like seeing through parts of the movie about like the camera angles and the way that the scenes were shot. It was done very well.
Yeah, and the one thing I definitely liked about the way that the story was told is that, when it wanted to be funny, it could be funny. And when the scenes showed, the one thing I liked about Danny DeVito's direction was the use of dark elements. And I mean, I'm not talking about like dark elements as in like, murder or anything like that. I'm talking about like the amount of shadowing and the amount of, the lack of light that was in like the whole world. And it shows Matilda like in quite a dark kind of gringy world in a way, like when she's being locked up in the chokey, or like when she's been subjected to television in that scene. And obviously then it shows how she's kind of like going through kind of a bit of a crisis when she's lying up in bed about what she's going to do with the situation that she's in. So it uses the dark very effectively. And then there's the other elements that it also uses very well, that I pointed out in the commentary, which you can listen to, is the amount of shots that show Mara Wilson basically being this small little girl in this huge world. And just these huge scary elements that are around her. And in some cases, she's nonplussed by them, but then in other times, she's actually is quite intimidated and is not too sure what to do, except she's going to go with the flow, if you will. She's like, she's in Indiana Jones going through like a Temple of Doom, like it's to her, it's a big adventure. Her being like out in the world, and I think it would be a very big adventure for any little girl who would go out in that type of circumstance. So right. Like these the visual elements on the screen are very telling of the story that Danny DeVito wanted to tell of Matilda, and so I can definitely say that he got that completely right. When you're getting that, you're drawn into the scene as it all plays out in front of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so very similar to Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory and James and the Giant Peach and Fantastic Mr. Fox, there are a lot of creative liberties in Matilda. First of all, it's mostly Americanized, very similar to The Witches, in which we have the whole setting taking place in a suburban American, town, as opposed to being in a small little suburban area in England. And we have the introduction of Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood. What if you read in the original book, Mrs. Wormwood is described as this very heavy-set woman with a whole bunch of curls and makeup and all that kind of stuff. And then Harry Wormwood is this very skinny man with tiny, thin mustache and very slicked back hair. So because we have Danny DeVito and Rhea Perlman, they decided to swap body roles, in which you have Harry Wormwood, who's like a heavy-set, balding man, but he has the slick back hair and the thin mustache, and Mrs. Wormwood, who's very tall and skinny, but with the tons of curls and the makeup. So they and then there's obviously we have Michael, who's the older son and Matilda's older brother. In the book, he's very, very quiet, and he's the most normal out of everybody. He practically says nothing. But in here, they decided to make him an antagonist to continue the offset that Matilda is not liked by her parents whatsoever.
Yeah, I just think that in the characters that we have portrayed in the movie, I mean, obviously the whole thing is Americanized, no doubt about that. And I mean, to be honest with you, the fact that you had Danny DeVito as the lead antagonist, well, not the lead antagonist, but as one of them, and the other type of elements that are currently going on the screen, you know, him being like a used car salesman, which usually is kind of like so something that seems to gravitate towards you know, an American caricature, if you will. And then you had obviously many American actors that were going to be and actresses who were going to be taking place in this. I mean, it was going to be a big stretch to kind of say let's keep this in England when there's so many other things that seem to be going for it. So, I mean, I don't blame them for going the direction that they are. The one thing I definitely will say is about in regards to the way that it's portrayed is the advertisement that's actually inside the movie. If you look, there's actually Budweisers and Bud Light and other things that are in there too. But if you notice that it's actually the antagonists and actually the bad guys of the movie who seem to be using the products rather than our protagonist. You
Yeah,
know,
I
like
think the only time in which we do see that is is Matilda when she's you know, testing out her powers over a box of Cheerios, but that's pretty much it.
yeah, but like I mean, if anything, she seems to be spending more time like promoting books than she is actually kind of like promoting products in
And
that.
that's true,
Like,
yeah, right. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, we haven't seen this much product placement in a movie since Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
at least in the Roald Dahl retrospective, yeah. I mean, like, I'm pretty sure we can pull out another movie and see a lot of like different like you know, product placements and stuff.
Right.
But the one thing I'll definitely say is that I mean they're not overly distracting. I mean, obviously there's still story to go through, and that kind of keeps you cultivated in it. But yeah, I would say it's not at the point where it's going to just take you away from everything that's going on. I mean, you're aware that there's a girl called Matilda who has these, you know, magical powers, and that she's in a really horrible family that she wants to get revenge on and stuff like that. You know,
Right.
if you're thinking about it, it's kind of like a bit of a toned down version of Yu-Gi-Oh when you really think about it. Like it's you know, like it's not like there's like an ancient Egyptian spirit that seems to want to get revenge on people and stuff like that every time, you know, they wrong Mara Wilson. No, I would admit that would make the film more funny, but I don't think that's going to happen. But
Right.
yeah, just going back into the whole world that Matilda finds herself in. Obviously, she has to deal with her awful family. She has to deal, obviously, with the school, and obviously we'll move on to Miss Trunchbull, no doubt soon. And then she usually has to deal with the fact that she has to deal with Miss Honey's dilemma as well, of like Miss Trunchbull being in her family home. And
Yeah.
so, but you know, the visuals on the screen do not disappoint, in my opinion. I think it's done correct the way, at least. You know, dare I say, it even goes. I always say Tim Burton would even kind of like approve of some of the things that are currently going on as well.
Yes.
I would
Oh,
have
and speaking of Tim Burton, if you notice some of the casting of the movie, so we have Paul Rubens and we have Tracy Walker as the cops. And as you guys know, Paul Rubens also played as the Penguin's father in Batman Returns. Danny DeVito was the Penguin, and Tracy Walker was Bob the Goon in the original Tim Burton Batman. So there's actually a bit of a Batman connection in Matilda.
thought.
So I think that
Matilda.
yes. Oh my god.
Yeah, but yeah, I just think it's. I mean, again, it's. It goes back to our debate we had in our, you know, in the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory retrospective, where we talked about like, you know, the ragtag gang of you know, people who appear in movies under certain directors and kind of like know each other and stuff. Like,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
we won't be releasing that episode until next month. But Aaron and I did discuss about how some directors, they tend to use the same people in their you know, in their lineup over and over and over again. So you'll hear more details about that when we get to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Yeah,
So
I mean, so in some circumstances, I mean, like one example I used in that episode was the Cupcake episode was Quentin Tarantino, how he seems to use Samuel L. Jackson constantly over and over in some places, which is good for some places, but then you get to the jump the shark moment where you have Samuel L. Jackson laughing maniacally on screen while he's getting oral sex. So like, yeah, there's times where it kind of like goes a bit too far.
yeah, I mean, like, you know, other examples include Kevin Smith, who always seems to have Matt Damon or Ben Affleck in his movies, or Jason Mewes. Then there's also various other actors as well. Rob Zombie is another example where he always uses Sid Haig or Robert Mosley or his wife.
But yeah, I just think, but I'm a fan of that. Like as long as the movie turns out good, I don't really care what actors they use. To be very honest with you. Yeah,
and Danny DeVito was no exception, because in a movie that he would direct a few years later, Death to Smoochie, he casted Pam Ferris as one of the lead actresses in the movie, but that's a story for another time. So, yeah, so going into Matilda, it goes pretty similar to the book, in which Matilda, when she was born, she had amazing talents, and she was able to take care of herself when her father would be going to work, her mother would be going to play bingo, and her brother would be going to school. And she would go to the library back and forth every day and read all the children's books in the library. And then she moved over to the adult books. And as time went on, she grew more and more intelligent, and she had a love and fascination for reading.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's the one thing that appears in Matilda is obviously the reading aspect of it all. Like the fact that Matilda intelligence gains so much that she moves away from like the children's material, she moves into like the adult material and everything like that. And like, one of the great things I liked about the movie was that she struck up this friendship with this old librarian who takes some interest in her and obviously wants to further her intellect. And I always would like to have seen like an episode of Hey Arnold where Helga would have like gone into a library and befriended like an old librarian, and she would have like furthered like her her ability to kind of like identify art and things like that. So
that would have been really interesting. Yeah, that would have been interesting. Like maybe there's a poetry contest and Helga wants to join in on it, and the librarian is like encouraging her. It's like, oh, I thought that your poem was really nice and you should do more of it. And yeah, I think that would have been really interesting to see that.
It was more kind of like, hey, read this book, read that book, like, hey, you might get some inspiration from this and that and the other. And,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Read Robert Frost, read Emily Dickinson, read all these other famous poets, see if you can get some inspiration to, expand your horizons.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so yes, we have Mara Wilson as Matilda, and this is definitely one of her best roles, like hands down.
Yeah, and it was a long time coming, to be honest with you. Like it was actually also she kind of got this part by accident as well, if you remember, because obviously many people obviously were falling down because of the flu and things like that. So they actually had to go for a rush audition, and then Mara Wilson landed the part.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Yeah, and so they did very well to capture Mara Wilson at that particular point in time, because obviously she was on a roll.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things about this is that, this would be one of the last roles of an actress that she would do right before, she decided to quit acting and she would go over to college. However, unlike most of the actors that we talked about in this retrospective, she actually did slowly go back into acting. She did a few web series and she appeared in a few videos with Channel Awesome, whether it be from Doug Walker or Lindsay Ellis. And then eventually she came back to voice as one of the villains in Big Hero 6, the animated series. So she's actually back in the spotlight.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, it can do people like really retire in these types of scenarios?
Like, I mean, we Peter Ostrom, Samuel Irons, Jason Fisher, Paul Terry. I mean,
they eventually come back.
Yeah, well, some of them do, but
others don't. I mean, others have legitimate reasons not to come back. But sure. I mean, like in regards to people like Mara Wilson, who still has a love for the industry and still has a love for the things that she does. Like, she still feels passionate about it. She's still going to do it. So.
Yeah, I mean, like she says in various interviews that she loved acting in theater as opposed to acting on, in the big screen. And also, she said that she had a great time doing voiceover work, and she says that she wants to do more of it. So, yeah, this won't be the last time that we'll be seeing Mara Wilson because,
absolutely not.
Yeah, she's a huge powerhouse on social media.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, So yes, we have so yeah, it's actually nice to so yeah, we have the scenes in which when, you know, she's reading the books and then her father's like shocked that she has so many books because, you know, they prefer watching television, or as the book says, they, you know, they crowd around into the telly. So, you know, we have Mr. Wormwood asking, it's like, where did all these books come from? And then she says, oh, I got these from the library. It's like, oh, but you've never been in the library before. You're only 4 years old. And then she says 6.5, which in the book, she was around 4 or 5 years old, but they decided to age her up to match closer to Mara Wilson's age. And so then they decided that, you know, she was this weird girl and that she, you know, should just watch TV like a good kid. And she's constantly alone and isolated from her family, which in the book, they don't express that whatsoever. In the book, she's kind of like a very smart aleck, very intelligent, very quick person who just seems to take it in stride. She doesn't really seem to have a lot of emotions when it comes to, you know, how her parents treat her. She just comes up with these clever ideas of getting revenge at them, and she doesn't really have a lot of feeling to how her parents, you know, act to her. She just thinks that they're just like kind of, you know, dumb and completely manipulated by television. But here they actually gave her a lot of emotion in this movie.
It's amazing because, you know, kids go through a crossroads of this particular thing. Like, I mean, how many times have we heard the stories of like kids of like neglectful parents and who go off the rails and just, you know, end up making a misery of their lives and stuff like that. And here you have Matilda, who is just intellectually frustrated and wants to do, you know, anything that isn't this. And so obviously then she starts acting out in, you know, in a way like starts kind of like rebelling against her parents in a very teenage way in some places, you know, like, you know, ending up replacing the dye in, you know, Danny DeVito's hair, and obviously getting that, he starts into like a bleach blonde hair at one point, and then obviously gluing his hat onto his head and stuff like that. You know, just going into these rebellious forms that she only knows how to do. And so it's and then obviously it builds up to the point where she basically, with her intellectual mind, just starts to go grasp her powers, and all of a sudden just blows up the television.
Right,
and
right.
so like it all builds up to that, and but yeah, it comes to that conclusion, and then obviously we move on to the point where she's moved into a school,
Yeah.
which is yeah.
Yeah, and there was another prank that she did to her parents that was in the original book, but was cut off from the movie because they felt it was unnecessary. So in the book, she had a friend that had a pet parrot who can speak. And so she decided to borrow the parrot and stick it up into the chimney where the parrot would be talking like, hello, 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 and all that kind of stuff. And the Wormwoods thought, oh man, there's a ghost in the house. And they would be looking around the house for days, and they kept hearing, hello, hello, hello. And, you know, her parents were wondering about, like, who's this ghost? You know, why is this ghost haunting us? Why, you know, who is that? And then eventually Matilda gave the bird back to her friend. But yeah, they decided to cut that from the movie because, you know, I mean, I guess maybe for animal cruelty's sake, it's like, yeah, you can't stick a bird up in a chimney, and, you know, you can't really do that. And in the book, they actually talked about, like,
well, whereabouts was it based again in America? I'm trying to remember where they when they put it in America, where did they put it? In what I mean, did they actually say whereabouts it was?
I mean, according to, well, there's never been an official claim on where the American state Matilda takes place in, but according to maybe a lunchbox that was shown at the end of the movie where it says Asbury, New Jersey, which is where Danny DeVito is from, many people assume that maybe the movie takes place in New Jersey.
Oh, okay then. So, well, I mean, maybe people had chimneys, maybe. I don't know. Like, I mean, like if it was taking place in the American South, I mean, highly doubt that people probably would have had like fires or anything like that, maybe, because obviously it was so warm. But
yeah, I mean, if it's in New Jersey where it's northern and there's snow and stuff like that, then sure. If it's an older house, then that would make a lot of sense. Yeah. And it did look like an older house as opposed to like a newer modern house. But yeah, I think that the neighborhood that Matilda stays in, I guess kind of like matches up with, when they were talking about in the book, where in the book it was talking about like, they lived in this small suburban area, and they were very quaint, and they lived in happiness with, her father being a motor car salesman, and her mom constantly making, bits of money to play bingo. According to my notes right here, apparently that it took place in Buckinghamshire. So that's where it was
Buckinghamshire.
Yeah, Buckinghamshire, yeah. So yeah, it was a Buckinghamshire village that the book took place in, as opposed to like New Jersey for the Americans.
Yeah,
anyway,
you can tell who the Brit is in this podcast. So.
Yes, we know, it's obviously me. Anyway,
hey. Of course it is.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, we get some, more. So yeah, and then we get to see, Matilda's idea of wanting to have revenge over her father, where she, put some hydrogen peroxide into his hair product, and that, putting glue onto his hat, which in the book it was completely swapped, where the glue came first and then the dye. And then we have Mr. Wormwood explaining to Matilda and to Michael about like, oh, this is how I do my cars. I put glue on the bumpers so that it would fall off eventually. I put sawdust into the engine. I rotate the meter so that it can go backwards. And essentially he's selling these old, worn down cars for overhyped prices. And he even steals car parts, which we have a section in the movie where the police are involved in trying to get evidence that he has stolen car parts.
Yeah, which is kind of weird, because it's like, saying that he's stolen car parts, and all of a sudden they're like turning up in like, cardboard boxes. Like, are people stealing them on his behalf, and they're getting like moved over to his house? Like, I'm not entirely sure.
I guess it's kind of like in the black market, in which like he has like a source where he buys car parts from like illegal source of maybe like a warehouse that is not in the market, and he's able to use those to put the cars together, as opposed to like a legit factory where he can like spend extra money so that he can be able to make better cars, because hey, cheaper products equals more money that he can make. So the fact that he's doing this illegally, the cops are saying, okay, we need to get some evidence on him so we can arrest this guy, because what he's doing is against the law.
Yeah.
And it is there in the book, but it's there like way towards the end of the book, as opposed to like in the movie, in which they're actually building up on it throughout even the first act. Anyway, so we have Matilda. So we then cut over to, Mr. Wormwood and Mrs. Wormwood and Michael watching TV, and, having to deal with the embarrassment that he got his, hat stuck in his head because of the glue. And so Matilda's just sitting in the corner reading Moby Dick by Herman Melville, while Mr. Wormwood is, saying like, you need to act like a Wormwood, and you need to start acting like one. And he takes her book and starts ripping it in pieces, even though that in the book it was The Red Pony by John Steinbeck. And the reason why he ripped the book was because he didn't want Matilda to read anything written by an American. So then when she's watching the TV, which is this game show called $1 Million Sticky with this, it just looks like such a sleazy midnight game show that you would watch, in which like you cover yourself in glue, and whatever money gets stuck to you.
I think the idea was to obviously make basically say how trashy American television basically was, and so like I think that was where they were getting at the time, and that was pointed out to everybody, and so and then all of a sudden like. Just coincidentally, the television just explodes.
Yeah, just so happens to explode by absolutely no reason, even though that Mr. Wormwood tries to come up with a valid explanation that, oh, it's a cheap and stolen set. Yeah. So that's why the TV broke off. And it turned out that Matilda was in the beginning phases of developing her powers, which in the book, she develops it way later on. she wouldn't know about her powers until she, spills the cup of water into Miss Trunchbull. But that, speaking of Miss Trunchbull, that's who we get introduced to next, and it's played off very mysteriously with like Mr. Wormwood and Miss Trunchbull in shadows, with a great juxtaposition between the sizes of Mr. Wormwood, where he's like really small while Miss Trunchbull is like really tall.
Yeah, and also the one thing I don't particularly like about like the end of that scene though is that they kind of give away a little bit of what she looks like in this, and I would have liked the mystery to kind of like be kept until we actually got to the school. And so I mean, like it's just too bad that I decided that, okay, well, we're just going to give you an idea of what she kind of looks like, and I would like her just to see her just kind of just drive away if anything, not get in the car.
Yeah.
But I think that's one thing I didn't particularly like about the movie. It kind of ruined the surprise of like, oh hey, this is the Trunchbull, and so I think if we got introduced to her right at the gate of the school, and then also that as well, like because it showed, at the very beginning, if that had been cut out, it would have shown how intimidating she actually was, and the shock value of that would have still been there when she was doing all her her craziness around the school grounds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so Matilda is going over to Cruncham Hall, which in the original book, it was a private British academy, which if you know from Roald Dahl's childhood, he attended various British academies where he was absolutely miserable. Go listen to our discussion on Danny the Champion of the World for more details. So she goes over there and she sees that, the kids are playing and everything is smiley and happy. And then all of a sudden, this huge shadow emerges from the door, and here comes Miss Trunchbull, played by Pam Ferris, making this our 5th actress who has been in a Harry Potter movie. We talked about Robbie Coltrane, Julie Andrews. We talked about Miriam Margolyes, David Thewlis, and Pam Ferris, who plays a minor role. She was in the 3rd movie as Aunt Marge. So, but nonetheless, she is a very intimidating antagonist. Many people say that she is one of the best antagonists featured in a Roald Dahl adaptation.
Mm-hmm. And like her face is terrible. Like she does look like a really horrible, horrid woman in this, and I really hope that she doesn't actually. Does she actually look like that in real life? I mean,
she's first of all, she's not that tall. They actually had like various camera angles and stuff like that to make her appear tall.
Oh, I'm not talking about like how tall she was. Like when they talk about George the Animal Steel was like when they brought him in for Ed Wood, and he said, oh, he's the Tor Johnson was like the first person to do monster movies without makeup, and I'm like sitting there like I really hope they kind of did that on purpose, like they were making that horrible to look at.
No, I mean, like, she more or less looks like that, but obviously, they decided to like not
yeah,
exactly. I mean, in real life, from what I've seen in various other roles that she's done, she's actually really nice looking, and she's according to various interviews from the cast and Mara Wilson, she's actually really, really nice. Like, she would talk about like her love of cats, and she would talk about like various like really nice things to the kids as soon as they were done filming. So she, very similar to Gene Wilder and, interacting with the cast. Apparently Pam Ferris was the same, in which she was really nice and she was really fun to work with.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, like people like that, I mean, obviously, are going to be really fun to work with, because at the end of the day, she's going to need to do that because she needs to, obviously strike up a relationship with the people that she's to be working with, and obviously she wants it to be positive. And so, and it's kind of funny that they decided that with the kids they would like, pour in the kids would have thought were kind of like unscripted parts of the movie. So like, obviously there's the thing with the news. That kind of came in, and obviously they weren't prepared for that, so the reactions that they had were genuine, which goes great to Danny DeVito's direction, if that's what he put into play.
Mm-hmm.
And but the way that Miss Trunchbull was portrayed in this movie is she's very intimidating, and she does it really well, and she's kind of like the worst parts of the Hulk, and like the worst parts of some of the witches that we saw in that other movie.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, I mean, she is up there with the Grand High Witch as like one of the main antagonists that you are frightful of.
Yeah, but one was created by Jim Henson and the other one's all natural.
Yes.
So yeah, yeah, I think there's a debate to be had there. I think a little bit. So.
Yeah. So yeah, we have we have Matilda just like frightened that, this mean woman is in charge of the school. And so she meets up with her other friends. She meets up with a girl named Lavender and another girl named Hortensia. So Lavender is supposed to be Matilda's friend in the movie. Well, in the book, they do know each other, but she's like rarely there. She just shows up in between various scenes. Hortensia in the book is a bully. Like, she would just like push around the little kids, like if she's supposed to be the higher up and that she knows everything. So they decided to like soften up the character and actually make them as friends, building up their relationship.
Which is a great thing to do, because obviously the people there are so, the whole atmosphere is so intimidating already. You really don't need to add any more. So I think they got the balance right, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Matilda already has her parents and she has Miss Trunchbull. Why add in another villain? That's completely unnecessary. So they did a right decision on making Hortensia a friend as opposed to a foe.
Mm-hmm.
And very similar to in the book, Hortensia does talk about Miss Trunchbull, about how she's very nasty to kids, about how, she caught a child eating M&Ms, during school, where in the book, it was during a Bible studies and he was eating a British candy, and that, she punished him by throwing him out the window. And also talking about how Miss Trunchbull was in the Olympics. She did shot put, hammer throw, and javelin. And of course, the torturous room known as the chokey, where there's like a whole bunch of like stuck out nails, and you have to stand there while there's like dripping pipes and broken glass and all that kind of stuff. It is a kid's worst nightmare.
Yeah, and probably very, very illegal.
Yeah,
imagine very, very illegal.
Absolutely. When we were watching this, it's like, could superintendent not fire her or something like that? And then we have to remember, like, this was based off of Roald Dahl's childhood, and he grew up around like the 1920s. So this was during a time in which when school authority was pretty common, that it would most likely be mean, with like whipping canes and rulers that you smack over to your hand if you're writing incorrectly and all that kind of stuff.
Just to clarify, what year did actually this movie take place in?
It doesn't say what year the movie takes place in, but the book takes place in 1988.
Yeah. So it looks to me like, looking at the type of the cars that he's selling and like the way that it's kind of like it all kind of looks, I would say it's somewhere like in 1970 something or 1980 something or other, something within those 2 decades, I would have thought.
Yeah, so, even the televisions look very bulky, like if you were seeing something like that in the 70s and 80s. I think that, I think the closest would probably be the 1980s, because that's when the book took place. But I didn't see anything like a cell phone or like a handheld or a Walkman or anything like that.
Yeah, so I think like the chokey and things like that. Obviously they wouldn't be things that would be probably permitted in that era, but I think it's more done to comedic, well, not to comedic effect, but kind of more to scare, more like to horror effect, more than kind of like just to kind of say, oh, this is a real scenario.
Right. It pretty much so. If you're, with Roald Dahl's life, when he was a child, he confronted a really mean, nasty woman who worked at a candy store that he and his friends would go to after they were done with their classes at the academy. And apparently that was who Miss Trunchbull was based on, this really nasty woman who worked at the candy store. And they did a similar prank that what they would do to Miss Trunchbull later on, but we'll get to that. Anyway, so... Miss Trunchbull approaches this little girl named Amanda Threpp, who has these pigtails. And so she's asking her to remove the pigtails. And she's like, no, my mommy thinks they're sweet. And, she says, your mommy's a twit. I don't know if this is supposed to be a reference to the twits from Roald Dahl, or maybe just the insult.
I don't think so. I think it's just an insult.
Sure. Anyway, so yeah, as mentioned in the commentary, the girl who was writing, who was being thrown off by Miss Trunchbull over to the garden, they had to put a harness on her so that she could be flying. And apparently, according to the Matilda reunion that was featured on the Blu-ray, she said that she had a fun time with that. She said that she felt like she was flying and that she wanted to actually go a second round, but they already had the take that they needed. Although she was really, really close to getting into the spikes.
Maybe that's the reason why they didn't do the second take, because they thought, well, the next one could end up in hospital. So.
Very true. Although I think that she even mentioned in the reunion saying, like, you know, I no longer wear pigtails because, you know, that movie kind of scarred me from ever having pigtails in my hair ever again.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah. Anyway, but
I think this is the thing we're going to talk about. I think a lot of people kind of walked away from this movie kind of like, you know, kind of scarred in a way.
Yeah. In a way, yeah.
Yeah.
So then we have, you know, Matilda, you know, relieved that, you know, Amanda was safe. And then that was when they were called into their class. And so we get introduced to Miss Honey, who is the teacher. And she's supposed to be the very sweet, motherly character that Matilda desperately needed, especially since pretty much her life she was surrounded by evil, well, not evil, like mean, angry adults who simply just didn't care. So, you know, with Miss Honey was definitely like somebody that she looked up to. She was very intelligent. She was very sweet. She was very supportive to all the children. And Miss Honey welcomed Matilda with open arms and allowing her to, you know, feel welcome. And then when they were going over their 2 times tables, which in the book, none of the children knew about their multiplications with the exception of Matilda, but they decided, hey, you know, let's have all the children know about their times tables, but Matilda knows about the advanced times tables, again, to give Matilda a little bit more relatability. And the one thing that I really did like was that reference to the BFG, when she said Doll's Chickens, when she meant to say Charles Dickens. And this is when Matilda and Miss Honey started getting a really nice relationship with each other.
Yeah, and you know, Miss Honey is the teacher I think we all wanted. To be honest with you, like she's a little opposite of Miss Trunchbull. And yeah, it's I think it also kind of plays out because obviously in the story, Miss Trunchbull is actually the aunt-in-law. I think the aunt of
the niece of Miss Trunchbull.
The niece of Miss Honey, yeah, sorry, Miss Trunchbull. So
yeah.
So obviously that kind of like she obviously goes the opposite way, and anything that kind of gives. You know, relatability to both Miss Honey and to Matilda, because obviously they come from very bad backgrounds and basically just caught up in this kind of like this whole mess, you know. So like it's so for them like there's a chance to kind of like have a really good relationship with each other on screen.
Yeah, and the woman who plays as Miss Honey, Embeth Davidtz, that you know, they weren't originally calling her. They were originally going to call the one of the main actresses in Law and Order SVU to be the main to play as Miss Honey, but she was called off because maybe she was like really busy with other projects. But yeah, they casted Embeth Davidtz instead, and I think that was like wonderful casting, especially since in the book it was said that Miss Honey was 22 years old and she was just starting off as a teacher, whereas in the movie she's obviously a lot older and she's been teaching for quite a while.
And so, yeah, I think in regards to the way that was set up into the school, I mean, the kids as well, I think, are great. I think in this thing, and also as well, like Miss Honey is, I mean, in the original book, she actually was around like 20, 22, something like that.
Yeah.
In the book, and they've also made her a bit older in this, obviously, to kind of like give the believability that she's obviously got some. Experience in teaching these children in some way, and so yeah, and also just giving her the you know the believability that she would basically take over the school at the end of the movie. So
yeah. Exactly. So yeah, so she sees that Matilda is wise beyond her years. She is way more advanced than any of the other children there. And so she decides to ask Miss Trunchbull if she could be moved over to a higher class. And Miss Trunchbull simply just doesn't believe her. She thinks that Matilda needs more discipline because, you know, her father is a terrible human being. And so, you know, we have Honey, Miss Honey's like, okay, if nobody's gonna be, you know, treating Matilda seriously, then I'll you know, teach her myself, and maybe I'll talk to her parents to see what they think of it. And when she goes over to her parents' house that night, oh man, it's quite a disaster.
Well, I mean, it's I liked the chemistry between Miss Honey and Mr. Wormwood in this, and I mean, obviously, you know, you can see that they're two polar opposites of one another in this, and seeing the back and forth actually was quite, you know, was quite interesting.
Oh no, I'm
So,
not
like,
talking about that. I'm talking about in the sense in which like she thought that she was going to be meeting up with the parents of the smartest girl that she's seen in a very long time, and maybe that maybe they're similar, but no, they actually are not very intelligent. They mostly prefer television more than books, and they don't believe what Miss Honey is saying about her being a very intelligent girl.
yeah. So, I mean, but at least it gives more sympathy for Miss Honey to Matilda's situation, at least. So,
Yeah,
like,
and also it
that
gives a
builds up.
great, it gives great foreshadowing for the fact that Miss Honey sees that Matilda is mistreated. She is underappreciated by her family, which she herself had went through when she was younger, which we'll discuss about in just a moment.
Hmm.
Anyway, so now we go over to the next scene in the movie where it's featuring Bruce Bogtrotter, or as the official Roald Dahl cookbook called him, Augustus Gloop, but more empathetic. Yes, I'm serious. In the Roald Dahl cookbook, where they have the Bruce, Miss Trunchbull's cake, they actually do mention that again. We have the same trope of with like Roald Dahl's portrayal of fat people. They're either Augustus Gloop clones or antagonists. That's pretty much it. Nothing else.
Yeah. Well, you know, like I mean, at the time, I mean, obviously, when you're writing a kid's book, I mean, like obviously, you know, fleshed out characters. I mean, it didn't really come along until a lot long afterwards, I would say. But
That's true. I will make
oh,
yes.
they're side characters too, so like they're not massively integral to the plot.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, it was written in the late 80s, so we could give, the benefit of the doubt. But yeah, I mean, when the movie came out in 96, I mean, to be fair, this was before Hey Arnold or Recess would come along and feature Harold Berman and Mikey, which didn't, use their weight as like a joke. They were actual kids who had actual backstories and progression of who they were. So yeah, we've come a long way since then. Anyway, so Miss Trunchbull calls Bruce Bogtrotter up in front of the assembly and saying that you stole my chocolate cake, and that chocolate cake was the most scrumptious cake in the entire world. And at first, she makes him sit down and just eat a slice of cake. Very uneventful, very boring, nothing to write home about. But then she calls the cook and says, okay, you're going to eat the entire cake in front of everybody, and you cannot leave until it's all gone, which was torturous for the actor who played as Bruce Bogtrotter because he hated chocolate cake. Every time that you get to see him in the movie and he's eating it, every time it was cut off, like, okay, we got this shot, he actually spat it in a bucket because he hated it.
Well, I mean, like, you can't say he didn't do what he needed to do. I mean, obviously, he portrayed the character the way he needed to be portrayed. So,
Yeah, that's
like,
true. In the book, it was mentioned that Bruce Bogtrotter was just all happy about eating the cake. He was just like gobbling it up like crazy. Well, in the movie, they decided to give him a struggle. It's like he liked eating the cake at first, but then when it was like slowly, being eaten bit by bit, it was like, oh, he can't eat it anymore. It's struggling. It's like it's agonizing with every bite, which again brings a great example of the relatability that they were able to add into the movie. It's like the kids are struggling. Any kid with a situation like this would be struggling to eat it. It's like, oh, I get to eat all the candy in the world, but then like maybe 1 or 2 pounds later, you're like, oh, I have a stomach ache. I can't eat anymore. You keep eating that chocolate and candy until it's all gone. It's like, no, you can't do that. And then
I guess you could say that his reluctance to even eat the chocolate cake, I think, also played into his performance.
yeah, it definitely it actually is a good advantage point, especially since you can tell he's not enjoying it whatsoever. Not only because it's too much, right? Not only because it's too much, but also because he hated the taste. I think that so we have Matilda cheering him on when he can't take it anymore, and then everybody else is cheering him on. And you can definitely tell that this was a movie that came out in the late 90s because it has that what would I would call it, like a Nickelodeon mentality about like, kids are the superior ones and the adults are like, the bad guys or something like that, which does play in a lot of Roald Dahl books, but not as much as this.
As I say, I think the cafeteria lady gives me a lot of Amanda Show vibes, or all that vibes. When you
Yeah,
think
yeah,
about
you're
it,
right.
like,
Yeah. It's more like Barth's Burgery from You Can't Do That on Television, in which is like this disgusting fast food restaurant where it's dirty and then the cook is just like covered in dirt and the burgers are disgusting. So yeah, it gave me those kind of vibes as well.
how's
But
that parody? Isn't that like pretty much every fast food restaurant in America?
I mean, that's the joke. And also it's Canadian.
That's the joke.
That's the joke. And also it was a Canadian sketch comedy show. So I don't know how fast food restaurants are in Canada, but I'm sure it's similar.
Probably pretty much the same as they are in this country too.
Yeah, pretty much. Anyway, so yeah, in the book, Miss Trunchbull is just shocked that Bruce Bogtrotter was able to eat the cake, and then she just like pushes him away. But in the movie, she decides to give every kid punishment by letting them stay 5 hours and copying off of the dictionary. And then Matilda gets home late, and then her father scolds her for being late from, going back from school because the car parts already arrived and nobody was there to pick them up. And then the police are there and they're just been waiting outside all day, even though if the car parts already arrived, shouldn't they have the opportunity to take pictures or get footage of that already if it was just standing right outside of the front porch?
Maybe they already did it off screen and they're just basically just hanging around, maybe.
But then if that's the case, then what about the scene in which they went over to the garage? I mean, wouldn't they already gotten the evidence right there?
I have no idea. Continuity error, maybe.
Yeah, that's the one thing I definitely was pointing out when I saw the movie. So, yeah,
maybe
so
it's just like, oh, hey, we got Pee Wee Herman on the payroll. Let's use him as much as we can with the amount which we're paying for. So,
yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, sure, and Bob the Goon as well. It's like, yeah, let's utilize whatever screen time that they have left. Anyway, so yeah, the parents have absolutely no urgency to call these guys who have been right outside of their house because they think that they're speedboat salesmen, even though there is no lake around where they live. But Matilda's warning them that those are cops and that they need to, clean up their act or else they're going to get arrested. And of course, they don't believe her. They think that she's lying and that she's just an ignorant kid. And so they pushed her away. And so then we go over to the next scene in which when, Matilda's hanging out with her friends, they find the nude in the lake, and then Miss Trunchbull is very angry about the status of her card, so she grabs Matilda and puts her in the chokey, which doesn't happen in the book, but we need to get more tension. And so then we have Lavender coming up with the idea of putting the newt in the water so that Miss Trunchbull can drink from it, which in the book, Lavender thought that on her own because she was just a mean, kind of like scheming person. So that's why she did it. Pretty much no reason other than she wanted to do it for Miss Trunchbull's revenge. Sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just think that with that whole scene, I mean, it's just, it was never in the book. It was just kind of like, it was just all thrown together, I think. And so it was, yeah, I mean, like, you have to build up the tension, I guess, and so I think that's what that did. But mind you, like, even then, like, just the threat of it would have been just enough, but I guess they had to go full throttle with Mara Wilson throwing her in there, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and yeah, for sure. So we have Miss Trunchbull going over to the classroom discussing about how, kids are just undisciplined and irresponsible and just absolutely nothing, and how they're just absolutely worthless to society. And then we have Matilda coming back, and then she's seeing everything that's been going on, and finally Miss Trunchbull pours the water into her glass and the nuke comes out, which was based off of real life, where Roald Dahl and his friends decided to prank the candy lady who had been treating them so horribly. When they found a dead rat in the corner of the store, they put it in there, and then they told the candy lady, hey, would you mind giving me some of those treats right over there? And then she reached in and she saw the dead rat and she screamed and she ran away. Eventually they were caught and they were given severe punishment, but they were really happy that they were able to get revenge on a person that they really hated. So a very similar thing in which like you can definitely tell that that Pam Ferris is like legitimately reacting towards the nudes and that all the kids are laughing. I can assume that it's because that they had no idea that this scene with the nude was happening, and you can see that they were genuinely laughing.
Yeah, and so I mean, it just plays into it's just Danny DeVito direction, just plays right into it, like I said before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so then we finally get to the scene which was in the book, in which Matilda starts developing her powers, in which she actually knocks the glass over and the newt is crawling over Pam, and she's like legitimately reacting to it, because apparently I think it was an interview or something where she was saying like she doesn't like lizards, so she was like really freaking out, and all the kids were laughing, and then finally she was able to like calm herself down. Apparently the newts were actually given names in the credits. Like one of them was named Sir Isaac and the other one was named Wayne. Get it?
Well,
Sir Isaac. No, get it? Like Sir Isaac
Newton. Yeah, I know.
And Wayne Newton.
Yeah.
Jokes.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so yes, that's the joke. Anyway, so then she she confronts Matilda saying that she was the one who did it, but obviously she has no proof. And so then when Matilda and Miss Honey are talking alone, she admits that she was the one who tipped the glass over and made Miss Trunchbull wet and having the newt on her. In the book, when she showed it to her, she did it. Like she legitimately did it. But in the movie, she didn't, because she had no control over it.
Mm-hmm. So, but then after that, obviously, Miss Honey's kind of like catching on to the fact that she probably has this gift. So she tries to get her to prove it, and obviously it doesn't work because obviously she's not getting angry enough to actually kind of demonstrate it to her.
Right.
So so then it just goes on to a quest for her to figure out how on earth she activates her powers.
Yeah, but before we do that, we get into Miss Honey's backstory, where we get to learn when she was a child, she had a good life, but then just like your typical Roald Dahl story, the parents die tragically, because of course they do. So the mother dies when she's very young. The father decides to bring her mother's stepsister to live with them so that she can feel like she has a mother figure around. But it turns out that stepsister was Miss Trunchbull, and so later on, the father dies by mysterious circumstances. Now, in the book, it is explained that Miss Trunchbull may have murdered the father because she wanted his inheritance and she wanted his house and his money and all that kind of stuff. And the girl just so happened to be in the way. So she decided to just tolerate that. But they never explained it in the movie. They just thought that, he may have killed himself. They were kind of hinting that maybe Miss Trunchbull was responsible for the father's death, but it was never stated. But
it's I mean, even then, like Miss Trunchbull was evil enough pretty much as herself. I mean, putting the murder of the father on her was, I think, I don't know if it was necessary or not, but obviously it's I don't know if it carried if it needed any more. I'm sure the gravity of her character obviously kind of like showed how much of a bad person she was. I don't know.
Maybe they decided to like remove that scene because very similar to making Hortensia the bully, they felt it was kind of unnecessary.
Well, if you remember in the chalkboard scene at the very end of the movie, they did say that she did allude to the fact that she might have had a role in his death.
Yeah, but it was never stated.
Yeah.
So then Miss Honey was concluding that she was able to live in this nice little cottage and she was able to get away from her wicked aunt and she was able to live happily ever after. But then, Matilda realized that, the person that, Miss Honey was telling the story about was her, and that her aunt was Miss Trunchbull. And in the book, if you see the house that Miss Honey was living in, it's like really depressing, like no furniture, no food, no water. The only thing she had in there was just like 2 little cookies that she served Matilda alongside with like boxes as furniture. And I mean, it's like and Miss Honey was saying like how depressed that she was and that this was all that she had, which kind of like deviated from like the movie, in which like Miss Honey was able to overcome so much tragedy that she was able to build a life on her own, and Matilda was able to get inspiration from that, as opposed to like Matilda being the one to help Miss Honey get the confidence that she needed, to making making Matilda almost like a Mary Sue character.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, but yeah, the one thing that I really did like was the scene in which when Matilda realizes that, grown-ups can be just as afraid of, just as afraid of things as kids are. And then when we get to see, her seeing Miss Trunchbull getting her stuff together in her car, that's when we see that she has a superstition of black cats. And, the fact that Pam was like, Pam actually was like really upset that she was kicking the cats because she just so happens to love animals, especially cats. So obviously that wasn't a real cat. It was a fake cat. And then it was like, switched between like the real cat and the fake cat. What they did was is that
they basically did what they did with Salem in Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Basically.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So it was like obviously like a stuffed cat that Pam was kicking, and then there was like jumped over to a real cat in which they probably like tossed it with and then the cat was okay. So no animals were harmed in the making of this movie.
Well, no harm is that's pretty much part of the course, pretty much for every Hollywood movie. So
I don't know. Anyway, so then we have this was not included in the book, in which when Matilda decides that I'm going to go inside the house and I'm going to see if we can find your treasures, Miss Honey. And then Miss Honey was like, no, we shouldn't do that. But Matilda's like, oh, we can do it, she's gone, we have plenty of time. And so then we looked around the house, and then Miss Honey describes more about her treasures, which were a doll by the name of Lissy Doll, which obviously a reference to Roald Dahl's widow. And then the portrait of her father, Magnus, is Roald Dahl himself. And then obviously you have the candies, which, Roald Dahl used to do, where he would like have candies after dinner alongside with his daughters. And so, and then we have the tense moment in which when Miss Trunchbull finally gets back after her car breaks down, and then she's like looking around because she suspects that there are some people inside the house.
Mm-hmm. So obviously we get that intense scene, and it's none of it's in the book though. That's the only thing, and so it's all played for visual effect, if anything. And there's whole hijinks ensue, and then finally they escape the house. So
yeah, pretty much, yeah. And so then we have, Mrs. Wormwood like easing up to the police officers, thinking they were speedboat salesmen, which you can obviously see that one of the police officers is holding a recorder in his hand, recording Mrs. Wormwood's every conversation to use against her. So it's like, yeah, what speedboat salesman has a recorder in his hand? Like, seriously. And then finally, Mr. Wormwood comes along and he's angry as usual. And then Matilda figures out that that is the source of her powers. It's anger towards her father and towards Miss Trunchbull and towards, everybody who's been mean to her.
Okay.
Yeah, how do you feel about that? Because in the book, it was described that Matilda was able to get her powers from all the years of intellect, of never using her brain. And then finally, when she does use her brain, that's when the powers came from, as opposed to in the movie, in which she gets her power from anger.
Yeah, I guess it's... I don't really have any thoughts on it, really. It's kind of like, oh, well, regardless of where it came from, that's what Matilda is. She gains her mental telekinesis from some source, and so it makes sense for it to come from anger, to be honest, with the frustration of her not being able to use her intellect to the highest degree. So in a way, it still kind of comes from the part of her brain that isn't being used for anything. So so in a way, it's not too differing, in my opinion. So.
Fair enough. And so then we get the scene in which she's able to master her powers by lifting everything, turning everything on and off, which obviously inspired the Matilda challenge that happened a few years ago on YouTube. Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. They had Pee Wee Herman in this movie as one of the cops. Wouldn't it have been fun if before? Well, mind you, they did this too late, where right after that they bring in the cops again. But how fun would it have been if like all that was going on and Pee Wee Herman just kind of like appeared into the window and just to like. Just made like a reference joke, like saying, even my house isn't as crazy as this. Like, just this, like, just something that would have got a laugh out of people who knew who he was.
Yeah, I think that probably that wouldn't have been appropriate if you recall. I mean, it was 1996, so this was like a few years after the allegations, and he wouldn't portray his character on TV in any form until 2007 during the Spike TV, awards or something like that.
I mean, regardless, like it was, it was everyone knows him as Pee Wee Herman. So, like, it's just this.
I mean, you have to understand. I mean, like, I don't know how it was in the UK, but back then, like, it was like majorly controversial. I mean, it's not a big deal like today because.
Wait, are we talking about what he did in that porno theater?
Yes.
I mean, yeah, just it's like it's. I just put it under the guise of celebrities doing stupid shit. It's obviously what he did was wrong. He should have been punished for it. I mean, obviously that was that. But it's just in that case, then I'm just really surprised that Danny DeVito casted him in that role.
Well, the reason why he was there was because
decision.
The reason why he was there was because he was really good friends with him. I mean, they obviously did Batman Returns, so it's like he was struggling with roles for the longest time. Like he could barely get any movie roles. I mean, he was only in like the Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie, then there was Dunstan Checks In, and then there was this. And then after that, he wouldn't get his stride in movies again until, Mystery Men in 1999 and Blow in 2001.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, yeah, but it would have been hilarious if he did that, but that's just me.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, maybe back then it would have been a little controversial, but I think today would have been pretty funny.
Yeah. Well, what about him sort of making references to Pee Wee's Playhouse?
No, I guess so.
Okay.
Anyway, so yeah, then we get over to, the cops are seeing the box of stolen car parts and they want to get footage of it so they can show proof that, Mr. Wormwood is stealing car parts and that he's doing something illegal. And Matilda is, she's been keeping an eye on them for quite a while. And she's like, okay, I need to take, action. My parents are not, going to do anything about it. So in order for them to, get off the hook for just a little bit until they can clean up their act, then yeah, I'm going to prevent them from doing any, any investigating, even though that technically they shouldn't be because they don't have a warrant.
Mm-hmm. So, they put that in. It would have been, obviously that she was moving the box around, but it would have been nice to see them have it. I mean, obviously then she let the handbrake off the car and let that roll down the hill, and I guess that's about as amount of fun you could probably have with them. Obviously, she wasn't going to go full like Macaulay Culkin on them or anything like that, but I think it was fun for what she did. So.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, then we go over to the scene in which when, she decides that she's going to test out her powers by going over to Miss Trunchbull's house and see if she can get Lissy doll and some chocolates and mess around with Miss Trunchbull for a little bit, which, she didn't do that in the book, obviously. I mean, in the book, instead of that fun little sequence where she was able to turn on the radio and have the cards and the chips flying around, she grabbed her dad's cigar and put it into her room and practiced for days until she could lift it up in the air. Fun. So yeah,
I think the montage we got with besides that, I think was far more fun than what was described in the book.
Oh, absolutely,
yeah.
Anyway, so then we have Matilda, grabbing the chocolates, got the doll, and so she decides to have some fun with Miss Trunchbull, and her ribbon is being flown away in the breeze, and then Miss Trunchbull finds it when she runs over to her car, and then she realizes that Matilda was the one responsible for causing all of that ruckus in her house.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, but mind you, the way that she found out about it, I mean, I would have liked to have been a bit more subtle. So, when she lost her ribbon in the tree, it would have been, more, I thought it would have been more interesting if, they would go around around the lines of, why is she so happy the next day, and stuff like that. Why is she, losing, it looks like she's slightly losing her mind, getting a bit more maniacal. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, she then finds out that she pulls out the ribbon, which then would shock everybody. I would have thought, because oh god, how it was up in the tree, how on earth did she find it? And she must have like been so shocked about everything that happened. She pretty much searched around every nook and cranny of the house and found this ribbon. And so I would have thought, instead of like kind of like making it so obvious that she found the ribbon, I would have made it kind of like, oh well, she obviously lost the ribbon, but it's like no big loss. But then later on there'd be like consequences for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would it just be better storytelling, but that's just me.
Sure. Anyway, so then, Matilda starts getting some more information about, Miss Honey's father and what, Miss Trunchbull's first name was, so that she can be able to use it for something a little later in the movie. And so, we have Matilda showcasing Miss Honey her powers, and then she is like really serious. It's like, yeah, we're gonna, give Miss Trunchbull the revenge that she deserves. And so, then we have Miss Trunchbull confronting everyone, saying like, a child came into my house. I want to know who did it and all that kind of stuff. And so then, we have Miss Trunchbull pointing out to Matilda, saying that she was the one responsible for doing it. And so, but then Miss Honey comes along and says, no, I was the one who did it. And she almost breaks her arm, which, yeah, I mean, if the superintendent was around and saw that a principal who was in charge of the whole school was responsible for dismembering a teacher and a few kids, it's like, yeah, she would be fired on the spot.
Yeah, but I think this is the one thing we can't really apply logic to this movie anymore at this point. I mean, obviously we know things that's just so outlandish. Like, I think it's just pointless pointing these things out.
No, that's true. Otherwise, we'd be like we would have been recording the podcast for like 6 hours discussing about the weird stuff that was going on in James and the Giant Peach. It's like, oh yeah, my suspension of disbelief is gone.
So here's my legal analysis.
You see, the peach was flying with the seagulls because gravity. No,
yeah.
No, we're not doing that.
No,
I'll let Matt Pat decide on doing that stuff. Anyway, so then we have the scene in which when when Matilda decides to control the chalk and it's writing off the message, which was derived from the book of everything that was written down. And what they did was that they actually had somebody in the back of the chalkboard writing everything backwards, while the chalk in the front was actually being controlled by a magnet. So the words were being written down, and in the book, the moment that Miss Trunchbull sees the words, she faints. And then she's never seen again. When, they were trying to search her to confront her, asking her about like, what is this all about that, the chalkboard was saying. But no, instead they decide, hey, she's the bad guy. She's the main antagonist in the movie. Let's see if we can push her buttons even more. And so we have like everything from her throwing a child out the window and then the child flies back in, the spinning globe and the food fight and all that stuff.
It's kind of like a boss fight in like an old, in an old retro game, kind of like, oh, here's the first part of the boss, and then all of a sudden you think he's defeated, then all of a sudden, oh, here's the second form. Like, I've got to keep playing, got to beat the boss. So it's kind of plays out in that kind of format. And then eventually, like, she gets food loads of pelted at her by every single student in the school, and then she ends up kind of just driving backwards out of the gate. So
I love the full circle moment in which when Bruce actually shoves the chocolate cake into her face.
Oh, how could they not put that in? Like, that was literally the icing on the cake.
Right.
Oh yeah. So, but
that was.
Isn't it kind of funny though? Like, then after that, you get Danny DeVito once again kind of narrating, like, and we're not hearing it. This is the thing. Like, there's a big gap between like him narrating certain parts of the movie, and then all of a sudden at the end, like, he just comes back in with a vengeance and like starts saying, "Oh, well, that's the last they saw of Miss Trunchbull," and then Miss Honey took over the school.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, James and the Giant Peach also did the same thing.
Exactly.
And so did Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Yeah,
they just have like sparse narration in between, so yeah.
Well, I mean, like, I guess the conclusion of the second act and into the final third, I guess, is more driven by elements on the screen and doesn't really need all that much explaining, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, and according to like various interviews, like Pam Ferris actually gotten injured like during a lot of those moments. Like she had like a broken finger, she bashed her head on the wall, and like when she was like really dizzy, she got nauseous and she like literally couldn't like get up for a bit. So yeah, she went through a lot of pain when doing those scenes.
I would have hated to have been health and safety on that day. I really
Yeah.
would. Like, do not do another take of this again. Look how bad, look how badly she came out of this one.
Oh man. Yeah. So then we have so wrapping up the movie. So we have Miss Honey and Matilda having tea together, and then we have her saying the fact about, like, did you know that a mouse's heartbeat goes 450 beats per minute, and then that, which was actually taken from The Witches, where that's a conversation that Luke had with his grandmother. It's like which trying to build up the nice relationship.
Yeah, again, like I'm really surprised, even when they call the chocolate they eat as well. Like I'm really surprised they haven't like talking about like, oh hey, it's coming fresh from the Wonka factory or something like that. Like just throwing all these references to like all other Roald Dahl books and movies and stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Anyway,
you could argue that it could be like a whole Roald Dahl cinematic universe. Like it's
yeah, I'm sure if Roald Dahl was alive, I'm sure he would have been all over it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so today, after their conversation, the Wormwoods decide to pick up Matilda, and they need to run away because the police are after them. And they said that they're going to be moving over to Guam. Where in the book they were going over to Spain. And them
going to Guam was like a really random thing. Like obviously I know it's an island like in the middle of like the Atlantic Ocean, or sorry, the Pacific Ocean, sorry. But I mean like what was them running off to Mexico like too controversial at that time? I thought, because apparently Mexico was good enough for Sarah Connor, but apparently not good enough for the Wormwoods apparently. So,
I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe because it's U.S. territory and they don't need passports. I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, so they have to run as fast as they can back to to get to their flight. And Miss Honey is like shocked that Matilda's being taken away, and Matilda's like, no, don't take me away. I want to stay with Miss Honey. And then she has the idea about bringing out adoption papers that she's carried with her for a long time until a moment like this would happen. And so they were like, yeah, I mean, let's sign our child away to some complete stranger. We don't care. We just need to get out of here before we're arrested by the police.
Well, they didn't care about it to begin with, so like it's that's no surprise there. But I'd be interested to know, like, did the Wormwoods actually make it to Guam? Like,
I mean, in the book, I mean, from what I understand in the book, I mean, I think there was like talks about like, they were I think captured by the police, or were attempted to be like really close to being captured by the police. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't really say about what happened to them afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so the movie ends with Matilda and Miss Honey coming together, living happily ever after. Miss Honey becomes the principal of the school, as opposed to like the superintendent, some guy named Mr. Trilby, who becomes principal of the school for reasons. And then, Matilda decides that, she's going to occasionally use her powers, but not as much as she used to. Well, in the book, she no longer could use her powers because she used up all of the energy that she had stored in her mind.
Yeah, and well, it was also on top of that as well. Like, I'm really surprised that they didn't go with the whole like she didn't have the powers because she's now happy with the life now, with being obviously being in Miss Honey's life, and vice versa, and and also she can read as many books as she wants. She has as much fun as she wants.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really surprised the powers just didn't go away with that. I mean, I would have done like the whole like I don't know, like how would you have played? I mean, would you like maybe like said, oh hey, I've got no powers anymore, but then just sneakily just kind of like move, turn the light off like at the end of the movie, like with the powers and that, maybe just say she secretly still has like a little bit left or something like that. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So yeah, so that was Matilda. Even though that the movie was a flop when it came out in 1996, it became quite a beloved movie. Like, and even the book is still regarded as like one of the most popular of the Roald Dahl adaptations. It's gotten musicals, it's gotten talks of a sequel. Quentin Blake actually did a very special drawing of what Matilda would be like in her 30s back in 2018. And, also there was a recent announcement that there's going to be a movie based off of the musical. And one of the first confirmed roles that was announced was that we're going to have Ralph Fiennes as Miss Trunchbull, which that's going to be awesome. Voldemort. Voldemort as Miss Trunchbull.
Well, I mean, like, how more evil can you get than Voldemort? You know.
Very true.
Okay.
Anyway, so yeah, the movie, you know, is beloved by pretty much everyone. If people are not saying that Willy Wonka is the best, then they're saying Matilda is the best adaptation.
This is the thing. Like, I'm still a fan of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Like, you know, like that's still out of all the Roald Dahl books, that's still going to be like my prime favorite. I think.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but when it comes to adaptations,
I still like the BFG movie from yeah, obviously there's still that, but hey, well, I mean, like we still got plenty more to go, so like there's still plenty more to get our teeth sunk into.
Yeah. Final words for me personally. I really like this movie. I think personally, in my opinion, it's even better than the book. I think that even though that the book, it strays very far from the source, I think that even though that the movie is strays very far away from the source material, the spirit of the book is still there. They were just able to take some tweaks and they were able to rearrange some things that actually made a lot more sense character-wise, story-wise, and various other things. So if I were to say which one is better, in my opinion, I would say go watch the movie. I think it's still really well done, and there's a reason why people think it's the best Roald Dahl adaptation. Slightly less though than Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. It's definitely like a top 3 in my personal favorite adaptations. This is one that I highly recommend you check out for sure.
Yeah, and so, I mean, in regards to the movie itself, I mean, I do like the movie, but in regards to whether I would prefer it to the book, I mean, like, I like the movie as its own experience, but I also like the book too. So
Sure.
I wouldn't say I prefer one over the other. I don't think. I'm sort of all I gotta say is I think Danny DeVito, I think, is a good director. I think that's what I take away from it. So.
Yeah, and I think that he should, direct more kids movies.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. All right, then. Well, that is it for this episode of the Roald Dahl Retrospective. So we are finally done with all of the 90s adaptations of Roald Dahl books. So tune in next time as we're going to be starting off the 2000s with the polarizing Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Until then, take care and bye for now.
See you later.